October 2024. Mar-a-Lago, Florida. The sun glinted off the marble columns of Mar-a-Lago as Donald J. Trump leaned back in his chair, a Diet Coke in hand and a golf scorecard tossed on the table beside him. But he wasn't smiling. Not today. Across from him sat Jared Kushner, unusually quiet, watching the former president pace. Trump had just received a secure briefing, not from the U.S. intelligence community, but from a private network of informants he'd quietly cultivated over the past year. These weren't your usual operatives. Some were American defectors, some exiled Ukrainian oligarchs, and at least one, according to unverified intel, had direct ties to Vladimir Putin's inner circle. "I know things," Trump muttered, almost to himself. "Things nobody else knows. Things they don't want the public to ever hear." Jared gave him a cautious look. "You think this is your way back in?" Trump paused, narrowing his eyes. "I don't think, Jared. I know. The beginning of the gamble." Behind the scenes, the 2024 presidential race was tightening. Biden was hemorrhaging support over the long war in Ukraine. American voters were exhausted. Inflation remained high. Military spending had reached Cold War levels. And the number one question on voters' minds? Why was the United States still spending billions on a war that had no end in sight? That question was the key to Trump's gamble. He would end the war in Ukraine, but on his terms. Terms that would shock the world, alienate his allies, and redefine his presidency, again. The Shadow Network. It started with a man named Andriy Tereshchenko, a former Ukrainian parliamentarian who had fled to Hungary under allegations of corruption and treason. The West labeled him a Kremlin puppet. Trump saw an opportunity. Andriy reached out through intermediaries, claiming to hold documents showing secret communications between Zelensky's top aides and NATO commanders. The documents allegedly suggested Ukraine was planning to launch an incursion into Crimea, a move that could trigger all-out war with Russia. Trump's team flew to meet him in Vienna, quietly, under the radar. No Secret Service. No press. Just Kushner, two private security men, and a translator who didn't ask questions. The meeting was filmed, not by the media, but by Russian intelligence. It didn't matter. Andriy handed over the files and said one thing. "If you want to end this war, Mr. Trump, you need to talk to both men, Zelensky and Putin. But not as a mediator. As a threat." The call with Zelensky. 2 weeks later, Trump made the call that changed everything. Not the infamous 2019 one, this one wasn't recorded. It wasn't official. It wasn't even through secure government lines. Trump used a burner phone in a Budapest hotel suite. Volodymyr Zelensky answered after 3 rings. He didn't sound surprised. "Mr. Trump," he said cautiously. "Is this a prank?" "No prank. I have information, Volodymyr," Trump replied, using his first name for effect. "And I'm giving you a chance. Stop the counteroffensive. Freeze your lines. Or I'll expose the plan to provoke Russia into a wider war, and you'll lose Western support overnight." Silence. "Then, that plan doesn't exist. But the documents say otherwise." "You're being manipulated." "Am I?" Trump chuckled. "Or am I just better at this game than everyone else?" The media blackout. Back in the U.S., Trump was laying the groundwork. He began leaking hints during campaign rallies, carefully worded sentences that suggested he had a master plan to end the war. "If I'm president again," he said to roaring crowds in Michigan, "Ukraine will be peaceful within 30 days. You'll see. I have the leverage. I know the players. I've done it before. And I'll do it again." Mainstream media laughed it off as Trumpian exaggeration. But in Kyiv, the mood shifted. Zelensky's administration went into crisis mode. The president held a private midnight meeting with CIA Director William Burns, who happened to be in Poland at the time. The Americans demanded answers. Has Trump been in contact with you? Zelensky hesitated. He called. Once. He made threats. Did he mention Crimea? Yes. And something about NATO documents. Burns leaned forward. He has Russian intel, Mr. President. And if he goes public with it, it could unravel everything. Putin responds. In Moscow, Vladimir Putin, ever the tactician, saw Trump's move as both a threat and an opportunity. If Trump was willing to publicly challenge the US establishment, if he was willing to call out NATO, if he was willing to paint Ukraine as the aggressor, then maybe he could be useful. Putin instructed his foreign minister to arrange a secret channel. Not through the Kremlin. Through an intermediary in Dubai, a Russian-Israeli arms dealer with links to the UAE royal family. Within days, Trump's people received a message. Mr. President, we are willing to talk. But not about peace. About partnership. The gamble deepens. The New York Times, The Guardian, and CNN began to suspect something. Leaks started to surface. Phrases like Trump's Ukraine deal and backdoor diplomacy entered the news cycle. But it was still too vague. Too murky. And the American public, fatigued by foreign wars, started to listen more closely to Trump's speeches. His approval numbers began to climb, not with hardcore MAGA supporters, but with moderates. Then came the leak that blew the lid off everything. A whistleblower from inside the U.S. State Department anonymously delivered a transcript of a communication between Trump's aide and a Russian diplomat. The transcript suggested that Trump had promised to recognize Russia's sovereignty over Crimea, block future Ukrainian NATO membership, push Ukraine into a ceasefire, or cut aid entirely. The media exploded. Congress demanded hearings. Biden called it treason. Trump denied everything. And yet, voters weren't sure. Was it betrayal, or brilliant strategy? Washington, D.C., November 2024. The leak hit Capitol Hill like a lightning bolt in a dry forest. At first, the document was dismissed as another disinformation campaign, Russia trying to sow chaos in an already divided election. But it was too specific. Too well-sourced. And when the New York Times published excerpts from a classified transcript involving a Trump intermediary and a Kremlin-linked diplomat, the political temperature in the U.S. spiked to dangerous levels. In a nation already primed for conspiracy, the leak had everything: war, betrayal, secret deals, and Donald Trump. The title of the top-secret memo? Project Black Frost. Who was the whistleblower? Her name was Laura Connors, but no one knew that. Not yet. A mid-level State Department analyst, Laura had been working in a classified cyber monitoring unit under the Bureau of Intelligence and Research. For months, she'd been tracking irregular encrypted communications between known Russian shell companies and off-grid American servers. Most were false leads, smuggling, dark web chatter, malware probes. But one day, in late October, she intercepted a message from a burner server in Miami to a contact in Dubai. It was encrypted with high-level diplomatic ciphers, outdated but traceable. Curious, she began reconstructing it over days, risking detection. When she saw what was inside, her hands trembled. Recognition of Crimea essential. NATO rollback mandatory. In return, ceasefire enforced within 30 days. Ukraine week without US dollars. Message from 45. The number alone sent chills down her spine. As in the 45th president. Trump. The communication was dated the day before Trump's rally in Phoenix, the one where he'd said, "The war ends fast if I get back in." The implication was explosive. Trump wasn't just making campaign promises, he was negotiating directly with a hostile power, potentially undermining U.S. foreign policy and aiding an enemy of the state. Laura couldn't stay quiet. She copied everything onto a flash drive, encrypted it, and mailed it anonymously to a trusted former journalist at The Guardian. Then she vanished. Media frenzy and political fallout. Fox News dismissed it as liberal paranoia. MSNBC called it the most treasonous backchannel in American history. CNN aired a 4-hour special titled, Trump, Putin, and the Shadow War on Ukraine. The Biden administration demanded a federal investigation. House Speaker Hakeem Jeffries called an emergency session, pressing for preemptive legislation to limit Trump's ability to conduct any unauthorized diplomacy should he win in 2024. But it was too late for containment. The leak had infected every corner of the media and the government. Protests erupted outside the White House, some accusing Biden of weakness, others accusing Trump of treason. And in the midst of it all, Trump was silent. No tweets. No Truth Social rants. No interviews. Just silence. Which made people even more nervous. Zelensky's response. In Kyiv, President Zelensky watched the U.S. chaos unfold with a mixture of dread and opportunity. If the documents were real, it meant Trump had tried to strong-arm Ukraine into a settlement favorable to Russia, a settlement that would legitimize Putin's 2014 invasion. Worse, Zelensky's silence after the secret phone call with Trump now made him look complicit, or weak. So, he acted. At an emergency press briefing, Zelensky stepped up to the podium in a black military sweater. His eyes were bloodshot. His voice calm but stern. I have spoken with former President Trump. Once. He suggested we abandon our counteroffensive and agree to terms dictated by Russia. I refused. Ukraine will not be traded like a poker chip between superpowers. If anyone believes this war is a game, I invite them to walk with me through the ruins of Bakhmut. It was the boldest statement he had ever made against an American leader. And it reverberated worldwide. The Dubai intermediary. In a luxury suite at the Burj Al Arab, the man known only as Yakov poured himself a glass of whiskey. He was Russian-Israeli, a former arms broker turned intelligence fixer. And he was the middleman between Trump's people and Putin's camp. The leak had exposed part of the plan, but not all. The real danger now wasn't Trump or Putin, it was Laura Connors, whoever she was. Yakov had heard whispers that she'd been identified through a metadata signature left during the encryption process. A Kremlin hit squad was already en route to Mexico City, where her last ATM transaction had occurred. But Yakov knew something else. Something neither Trump nor Putin had yet realized. Laura hadn't just leaked one communication. She had multiple files. Some were even worse. Inside Trump's war room. Back in Palm Beach, Trump sat with 3 trusted advisors, Kash Patel, Stephen Miller, and a new addition, retired LT. General Curtis Maddox, a firebrand national security hawk who had been quietly advising Trump for months. Time to pivot, Maddox said. Make it about ending the war. Not backroom deals. Trump nodded slowly. We need to find the girl, Miller added. She's the liability now. Not the press. Not Biden. Her. Trump waved his hand. We'll find her. But I want Zelensky to beg. He's too proud. He needs a reminder that without me, he's got nothing. He turned to Patel. Set up the call. Again. The second call. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was a threat. Trump called Zelensky through an encrypted app using a Romanian telecom tunnel. The voice was unmistakably his. You went public, Volodymyr. Bad idea. You think you'll survive without American dollars? You won't. You think Biden will help you after November? Think again. Zelensky didn't flinch. You are not the president. And you are not the United States. Trump laughed. Yet. The line went dead. Laura's decision. In a tiny apartment in Guadalajara, Laura Connors sat alone, watching the fallout play out on her cracked laptop screen. She wore a hoodie and kept the blinds drawn. Her burner phone buzzed. A single message appeared. "They're closing in. Are you ready to finish what you started?" She stared at it for a long time before replying. "Yes." Sending the rest. And with that, she uploaded 4 more files to 3 different newsrooms, each one time-stamped, digitally signed, and detailing communications between Trump's network and Russian oligarchs offering financial backing in exchange for policy favors. One document referenced a company in Cyprus laundering donations into a U.S. super PAC. Another suggested prearranged talking points for a new wave of conservative media attacks on Zelensky. And the most damning? A transcript of a private audio recording from Vienna. Trump's voice, unmistakable. "Give Crimea to Vlad. Let NATO squirm. The rest? We spin it. Trust me, they'll thank me later." Vienna, Austria, 6 months earlier. The chandelier above the private dining room at the Hotel Imperial gleamed softly as servers retreated behind thick curtains. No journalists. No phones. No security tapes. At the head of the polished mahogany table sat Donald J. Trump. Flanked by 2 former campaign operatives and an American energy executive with prior dealings in Eastern Europe, Trump swirled a glass of orange juice. Across from him sat Dmitry Sokolov, a Kremlin-affiliated financier whose tech company served as a digital shell for covert Russian capital. Also present was Yakov, the arms broker now operating as Trump's unofficial go-between. Unbeknownst to everyone, Yakov had secretly activated a pin-sized voice recorder inside the inner lining of his Cartier watch. He didn't trust Sokolov, or Trump. But he knew the value of leverage. The conversation that followed would later shake global politics. The unfiltered Trump. "Here's how I see it," Trump said, voice measured. "Ukraine is bleeding America dry. Our people are tired of it. Zelensky's a good actor, I'll give him that, but he's lost control. You and your guy want Crimea? Fine. You can have it. But I need deniability." Sokolov smirked. "What would that cost us?" "Recognition. Not on paper, not yet. But implied. I pull back U.S. support, block any future NATO talks. Zelensky will have no choice but to accept a ceasefire. You hold what you've got. In return, I expect help with messaging." Sokolov nodded. "Messaging?" Trump leaned in. "Election support. Financial. Indirect, of course. Super PACs. Media buys. Coordinated narratives. Nothing obvious. Just help me win, and I'll help you win peace." Yakov stared at his plate, heart pounding. He was recording a deal to end a war, not through diplomacy, but through coercion. Not between governments, but between oligarchs and a former president. When the dinner ended, he knew he had something explosive. But who would he trust with it, and when? Back to the present, the world reacts. The release of the Vienna audio hit global headlines like a thunderclap. The Guardian and New York Times received copies of the recording directly from Laura Connors. Fact-checked. Authenticated. VoicePrint verified. CNN ran it and censored during prime time. Fox News called it a Russian disinformation trick. Meanwhile, Trump denied everything. Fake audio. Total hoax. Never happened. These people are sick. But his voice was unmistakable. Even his own supporters recognized it. Polls began to wobble. Moderate conservatives grew uneasy. International leaders voiced alarm. NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg issued a rare public condemnation. Undermining Allied unity and legitimizing illegal annexation is not a strategy, it's sabotage. The European Union opened an investigation into foreign influence in U.S. elections. Zelensky went on live TV and simply said, "Now the world knows what Ukraine was up against." Congress implodes. Within hours, a bipartisan uproar exploded on Capitol Hill. House Republicans were split down the middle. Some denounced the recording as fabricated, others, privately, admitted it was political suicide to keep defending him. Speaker Jeffries announced hearings would begin immediately. The Senate Judiciary Committee issued subpoenas for Trump's inner circle. Jared Kushner, Kash Patel, and Lieutenant General Maddox were all named. So was Dmitry Sokolov, who, predictably, vanished from public view. But the bigger shock came when Senate Intelligence Chair Mark Warner addressed the nation. This recording, if verified, represents a direct attempt to subvert U.S. foreign policy and leverage international conflict for personal political gain. If true, it is a betrayal of the highest order. The MAGA split. At a rally in Texas, Trump's diehard base roared in support as he stepped on stage. He called the Vienna Recording bullshit from the deep state, ridiculed Zelensky as a mini-Churchill wannabe, and promised to end the war on day one. But not everyone was buying it anymore. A new coalition of former Trump supporters, calling themselves True Patriots for Peace, began organizing online. Their message was simple: Trump had crossed a line. Not because he wanted peace, but because he tried to sell it like a backroom deal, at the cost of America's integrity. Even some conservative veterans joined in. A retired Army colonel appeared on MSNBC and said, "I voted for him twice. But you don't sell out our allies. That's not leadership. That's betrayal." Putin's silence. Moscow was unusually quiet. Putin made no public statements. Russian state media oscillated between mocking the West and downplaying the Vienna recording entirely. Behind closed doors, however, the Kremlin was nervous. If Trump was burning too hot too fast, he might become useless, or worse, a liability. Plans were made to reroute covert funding. Russian cyber units were ordered to dig deeper into Laura Connor's identity. Meanwhile, Yakov, now considered a potential traitor by both sides, went underground. The peace plan leak. Days after the Vienna recording went public, another document surfaced, a 14-page outline titled Framework for Peace, Strategic Restoration of Order in Eastern Europe. The source, anonymous, but verified by cybersecurity experts. The proposal called for immediate halt of U.S. military aid to Ukraine. Recognition of Russian control over Crimea and Donbass. Removal of all NATO-related language from Ukraine's constitution. A joint U.S.-Russia task force to enforce the ceasefire. Massive reconstruction contracts awarded to U.S. firms. It was clearly drafted by Trump's inner circle. What shocked analysts most? The reconstruction clause, a thinly veiled goldmine for Trump-aligned private contractors. CNN's headline said it all. Peace for sale? Biden finally strikes back. Up until now, President Biden had remained mostly reserved, measured in his public statements, refusing to give Trump more airtime. But with the Vienna tape verified and the peace plan leaked, the gloves came off. Standing behind the White House podium, flanked by Secretary of State Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, Biden addressed the nation. Let me be clear, the United States does not negotiate behind the backs of our allies. We do not offer up sovereign nations in backroom deals. And we will never allow a former president to make promises to foreign adversaries that undermine everything this country stands for. He paused, looking directly into the camera. Mr. Trump, if you believe what you did was brilliant strategy, the American people will decide. But if it was betrayal, history will not forget. Laura's final move. Laura Connors, still in hiding, knew the storm was only beginning. She received an encrypted message from a source she hadn't heard from in years, someone inside the NSA. They found you. They're not just Russian. Some are private. Mercs. You have 48 hours. she didn't hesitate. Laura sent one final upload, this time to a coalition of global news organizations. A data dump labeled Project Black Frost, Final Package. Inside were video clips, recordings, financial records, evidence that painted a picture not just of Trump's Ukraine deal, but a global network of influence stretching from Moscow to Miami, from Dubai to Delaware. At the end of the transmission, she added a message. This isn't about left or right. It's about who owns peace, and who profits from war. Global shockwaves. Within 24 hours of Laura Connor's final data dump, the world reeled. More than 12 terabytes of information were released to journalists, cybersecurity analysts, and lawmakers across the globe. Coordinated exposés broke on the BBC, Al Jazeera, Reuters, Der Spiegel, and the Associated Press simultaneously. The files confirmed everything, and more. Direct financial transfers from Kremlin-linked shell companies into U.S. political action committees. Emails between Jared Kushner and intermediaries promising to reshape the post-war map in exchange for support. Secret meetings between retired American generals and Russian oligarchs in Istanbul, laying out military disengagement scenarios. And at the center of it all, a single directive, written by Trump himself in a private memo to his campaign legal team. America first, but let's be smart. Ukraine is a chip. If we can flip the table, we write the rules. Capital chaos. Congress went into emergency lockdown. Threats poured in. Protesters flooded D.C., some waving American flags, others Ukrainian, and many holding signs reading. Betrayal is not strategy. No deals with dictators. Whose peace? Whose price? Speaker Jeffries introduced an unprecedented emergency resolution, the Prevention of Undue Foreign Influence Act, barring any candidate, former or current, from engaging in foreign diplomacy or accepting non-governmental foreign assistance. House Republicans fractured. Some broke ranks and supported the measure. Others called it election interference. Senate hearings convened around the clock. Testimony from cybersecurity experts, intelligence officials, and ex-campaign aides painted a chilling picture of how close the U.S. had come to turning Ukraine into a transactional commodity. Trump's public response. At a hastily arranged rally in Las Vegas, Trump finally addressed the leaks, or tried to. He didn't deny the memos or the meetings this time. Instead, he reframed it. What you're seeing is leadership, folks. Tough choices. Smart deals. I tried to end the war. Biden couldn't. NATO couldn't. Zelensky? Please. I could have saved thousands of lives, and they call that betrayal? The crowd, smaller than usual, erupted. But the energy was different. Divided. Uneasy. They say I sold out? No. I bought peace. At a discount. His tone veered between defiance and fatigue. Even his most ardent supporters sensed the storm was getting harder to spin. Zelensky's final play. Zelensky, watching from Kiev, made his boldest diplomatic move yet. He sent an official request to the International Criminal Court in The Hague to open an investigation into attempts by foreign actors, including former American officials, to manipulate the sovereignty of Ukraine through coercion and threats. It was a symbolic act, and everyone knew the ICC had no real jurisdiction over U.S. citizens. But it sent a global message. Ukraine would not be used as a bargaining chip, not by Russia, and not by America. Privately, Zelensky reached out to Biden and NATO leaders with a quiet plea. No matter who wins your election, we cannot survive if the West turns peace into business. The last leak. As the world tried to digest the fallout, a final video appeared online. Posted anonymously. Just 11 minutes long. It showed Yakov, sitting alone in what appeared to be a safe house in southern Europe. Gaunt, tired, but clear-eyed. I was in Vienna. I recorded everything. Not for revenge, for survival. What I saw was not just betrayal of Ukraine, but betrayal of principle. America has enemies, yes. But sometimes the real danger comes when power is wielded without responsibility. He ended the video by raising a handwritten sign. To those who profit from war, we are watching. And then the screen went black. Within hours, Yakov was found dead in a Lisbon apartment. Cause of death, apparent suicide. Few believed it. Laura Connors emerges. On the final day of 2024, Laura Connors stepped out of the shadows. In a quiet, pre-recorded video sent to multiple news networks, she identified herself and confirmed everything. The files. The sources. The danger. She detailed how she obtained the communications, the risks she took, and why she waited. This isn't about Trump. Or Biden. Or Zelensky. It's about truth. The world needed to see how easily peace can be sold, and who's buying. Within days, the US government granted her full whistleblower immunity. Some called her a hero. Others branded her a traitor. Either way, she'd changed the election. The January surprise. Just weeks before Inauguration Day, the Supreme Court ruled on the final legal challenge, whether Donald Trump could appear on the ballot given mounting evidence of potential violations of the Logan Act and constitutional concerns. In a narrow 5-4 decision, the court ruled in Trump's favor, citing the lack of criminal indictment and reaffirming his eligibility. The verdict sparked immediate fury and triumph. Supporters claimed vindication. Opponents vowed resistance. And Trump, as always, doubled down. Closing scene. January 20, 2025. The Capitol stood frozen under an overcast sky. Trump did not attend the inauguration. Biden was sworn in quietly for a second term. His speech focused on resilience, transparency, and the responsibility of democratic institutions to withstand corruption from within and pressure from abroad. Meanwhile, a shadow campaign already stirred behind the scenes, whispers of indictments, congressional inquiries, international trials. But for the millions watching at home, only one question remained. Was Trump's Ukraine gamble a betrayal of everything America stood for? Or was it, in his own words, a deal the world wasn't ready for, until it was too late? February 2025, the reckoning begins. Within weeks of President Biden's quiet second inauguration, the Department of Justice issued a formal statement. The Office of the Special Counsel is opening an inquiry into potential violations of federal law pertaining to unauthorized foreign negotiations, financial entanglements with foreign nationals, and attempts to subvert U.S. foreign policy for personal political gain. Trump responded before reporters could even ask questions. This is just more garbage. More witch hunts. I didn't betray anyone. I tried to save lives, and they're punishing me for it. But this time, the country wasn't so quick to rally to his defense. The revelations had shifted something, not only in Washington, but in the American psyche. The gamble had been exposed. Now the nation had to decide if it had a price. Global fallout. In Europe, the consequences were immediate. NATO accelerated Ukraine's integration, offering a fast-track security partnership short of full membership. The EU passed emergency legislation against covert foreign interference via political backchannels, modeled in part on the Trump-Sokolov documents. In Russia, Putin publicly distanced himself from the scandal, but leaked Kremlin memos revealed he was furious. Trump had spoken too openly. The Vienna Recording made Putin look weak, a man begging for a backdoor deal instead of winning on the battlefield. For Ukraine, the stakes were existential. Zelensky launched a diplomatic offensive, visiting every major capital in Europe within 6 weeks. His message was consistent. We are not for sale. Not to Moscow. Not to Mar-a-Lago. The trials begin. While Trump wasn't indicted immediately, several of his closest advisors were. Kash Patel was charged with conspiracy to commit unauthorized diplomacy. Jared Kushner was subpoenaed for financial records linked to offshore political contributions. Lieutenant General Curtis Maddox invoked the Fifth more than 40 times before walking out of a Senate hearing. Behind closed doors, Trump's legal team prepared for multiple fronts. A DOJ inquiry into potential Logan Act violations. A congressional ethics investigation over the Vienna Plan. A potential civil lawsuit from the Ukrainian government. The former president's political machine framed all of it as political persecution. But even some MAGA-aligned lawmakers distanced themselves. Senator Josh Hawley privately told aides, "If this gets to trial, we all go down with him." The court of public opinion. Cable news ran non-stop coverage. Podcasts dissected the Vienna Recording line by line. Social media ignited with theories, conspiracies, defenses, and condemnations. But most Americans, exhausted by years of political chaos, fell into a simpler question. Did he do it? And if he did it actually matter? A Gallup poll in March showed 52% of Americans believe Trump had made a secret deal with Russia regarding Ukraine. But only 37% believed he should face prison time for it. The divide wasn't about legality. It was about worldview. To some, Trump remained a businessman, willing to negotiate, deal, and disrupt global systems to benefit America. To others, he had crossed a sacred line, selling influence for power, using human suffering as leverage. Zelensky in Washington. In April 2025, Volodymyr Zelensky was invited to address a joint session of Congress, an unusual move, given the political firestorm. His speech was careful, emotional, and direct. "I do not come here to accuse. I come here to remind. That peace is not made in secret. That lives are not chips on a table. That allies do not negotiate each other away." The chamber gave him 5 standing ovations. Even some of Trump's former supporters clapped. It was a turning point. For the first time since the story broke, the nation's attention shifted, from scandal to reflection. Trump's media blitz. Unwilling to let the narrative go, Trump launched a media campaign. A new book deal. Exclusive interviews. A 3-part docuseries called The Art of Peace streaming on a conservative platform. In it, he claimed the documents were out of context. That the Vienna meeting was a feeler and nothing more. That he had intended to bring Putin and Zelensky together, and Biden sabotaged it. The series included behind-the-scenes footage, voiceover commentary, and selective emails that framed Trump as the would-be peacemaker shunned by a political establishment afraid of losing power. Millions watched. Tens of millions debated. But it didn't stop the subpoenas. The verdict of history. By late summer 2025, no criminal conviction had been handed down. The DOJ continued its investigation. Civil lawsuits multiplied. The ICC opened symbolic proceedings, knowing Trump would never stand trial in The Hague, but still declaring. Attempting to negotiate away the sovereignty of a nation under illegal invasion constitutes a breach of international norms. The UN issued a rare condemnation, not naming Trump, but warning of unprecedented interference in global conflict resolution by private actors. Historians began writing books. Students debated it in universities. Political science professors developed entire courses on the Trump doctrine and the weaponization of diplomacy. Final scene, a conversation in silence. Mar-a-Lago. September 2025. Donald Trump sat alone at the edge of the golf course. Not with aides, not with lawyers. Just himself. He had no phone. No speech. Just the sound of the ocean and distant birds. He watched the sun dip over the horizon. And in that silence, one question hung in the air, the same question that now echoed in books, headlines, and history. Was it betrayal? Or brilliant strategy? Trump never answered. Maybe he didn't have to.